Welcome back to the channel, everyone. I'm going to be looking at stories, writing stories in this video, and more specifically how to begin your story, your short story, which is useful for all the exam boards because there will be a point somewhere where you have to write creatively or have to write a story. About a year ago, I did a video about using hooks or fiction hooks in order to begin stories in an engaging way. I'll put the link to that video in the description box below. But I just want to go a bit further in this video and just use one specific short story example to show you how you could use these hooks to begin your story idea. So, as I said before when I made the first video, the analogy of the hook is the idea that you are hooking the reader into your story, so into your imagined world or your story world. You've got to intrigue them enough that essentially they keep reading. So in this analogy, the hook is your writing and the fish is the reader. So in effect, you're yanking the reader out of their water and you are compelling them to read your story. You have to bear in mind that the examiners that mark your stories will read hundreds of stories as they mark their exam papers over the summer. And therefore it's important, I think, to make sure that you write something that stands out from all the others. And the first sentence is where that begins, because you really want to give a good, confident impression about your writing from the first sentence that you write on the page. Just a reminder of the mark scheme, these are kind of common phrases that you will find in a mark scheme for creative writing. Writing is engaging or writing is compelling, and the idea being that you're effectively making the reader want to read it because it's so good and it's so compelling and so interesting. So it's important that your readers are grabbed with the first sentence. Otherwise, in the real world, of course, they will put the book down and they'll never see the light of day. And just bearing in mind that some of you, in many years to come, might be doing creative writing courses at university, for example. And I do know where courses, the whole course is just getting people to write the first 5 pages of their novel, because it's so important to spark the reader's interest in those 5 pages. If the reader is not interested, they're just going to put the book down. And if you are trying to make money from your writing, of course, you're not going to. So it's really important to think about beginnings. Beginnings are really important in stories. So in the video that I made about a year ago, I went through these 4 types of hook. We have dialogue hook, which is essentially when you begin with dialogue. A mystery hook, which is when you intrigue the reader through giving a particular piece of information. A setting hook, which is description, so you're introducing where the story is taking place. And finally, a rhetorical question hook, where you begin your story with a question. And that can also get you marks, of course, for sentence variation and punctuation, because you've got to use a question mark at the end. So those are the 4 hooks that I often get my students to choose from when they are writing a story or even a piece of descriptive writing. So in a previous video, which was about coming up with story ideas in the first place, this is now in a position where you have your idea and now you've got to write it. You've got to write that story in the time in the exam, which is why the focus of this video is about getting started. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use one of those short story ideas I showed you in a previous video and just show you how you might want to start it using these particular hooks. So the task is write a story set in a remote place. And one idea from a previous video was a man tries to stay alive after his plane crashes on a remote island in the Pacific. An idea that was inspired by me reading Lord of the Flies and also another one of William Golding's novels called Pincher Martin, which is about this man that washes up on an island like this and tries to stay alive, and he begins to hallucinate and things. Really quite interesting about, you know, a kind of human experience and our determination to try and stay alive. So this could be the first paragraph, for example, of your story, and you can see from the red bit that I'm using the dialogue hook. The man is saying, if my arm keeps bleeding like this, I'm not going to live much longer. If that's the first thing that the reader reads, they're going to have lots of questions. Whose arm? What's happened? You know, so they're naturally intrigued by this almost sense of drama, this sense of mystery in terms of what has happened. And then I just carry on by introducing, I suppose, the setting here and what's going on. The second hook is the mystery hook, which is again saying something like the single streak of smoke bled from the wreckage of the small aircraft, which infers some kind of plane crash, which is what happens. And again, if your reader reads that, then they want to know more. You're deliberately preventing them from learning everything in the first sentence. They've got to keep reading if they're going to understand anything else. So that's the hook. It's hooking them into your story. And then you've got this nice description of the smoke rising into the sky being compared to cigarette smoke and the way in which it kind of meanders and curls as it moves upwards into the atmosphere, a bit like smoke leaving the end of a cigarette, it says. So that's using the mystery hook. The third hook is using the setting hook, and this is perhaps the simpler of them all, which is where you just start your story by describing the scene and where that part of the story is taking place. So here I've just described the island and what it looks like. You've got an image there of the kind of the setting that I was trying to go off. The island was almost circular in shape and was peppered with areas of dense forest, beside which beaches of white sand merged into the shallow depths of rock pools and creeks. So the hook here is you're inviting the reader in to your world, the world that you're setting the story in. And finally, to begin your story with a rhetorical question, how could something so beautiful be so dangerous? The island was almost circular in shape and was peppered with areas of dense forest, beside which beaches of white sand merged into the shallow depths of rock pools and creeks. Stacks of granite towered out from the bay, on which seagulls perched and screamed amid a smell of drying fish. So very simply here, perhaps another simple one, just to begin your story with a question. You don't always have to start your story with one day or once upon a time. It's perfectly fine and also shows a degree of confidence if you were to spice up your sentence types and begin your story with a rhetorical question like that. So a very short video, but hopefully useful in terms of how important it is to begin your short stories with something compelling. Think about how are you going to make your first sentence as interesting as possible to hook the reader in. Thank you.